Every time someone asks artificial intelligence a question, somewhere in the world, a building full of processors burns electricity, it generates heat, it uses water to cool itself down. Because you see, the cloud isn't a cloud, it's a building. The question of where that building sits and who benefits from it being there is the most important infrastructure question of this generation. You see, in 2005, a guy named Thomas Friedman wrote a book called The World is Flat. And he told us the world was flat, basically, that the internet would erase geography, that you could build from anywhere, you could hire from anywhere, that distance was dead. And to be fair, he was half right. He was right about things like supply chains. He was right about kind of the routine work. He was right that a call center or a dev shop could operate from anywhere. But he was wrong about kind of the frontier of innovation. Innovation didn't spread out. It stayed concentrated. There has been research that shows these geographic spikes and the things that creates those. Silicon Valley didn't disperse, it deepened. The cities with the densest connectivity infrastructure captured more value after the internet arrived, not less. So the world isn't flat, and it never was. It just built new mountains, so to speak. And the mountains always form in the same place. Wherever the connectivity infrastructure of that era is the densest, is where you start to see these new mountains form. So let's talk about these eras, if you will. The first one was water. This is one of the oldest. Like, cities didn't grow where the ideas were best. They grew where the rivers met. They grew where there was a confluence of water, where there were harbors, where there were ports. That's where the great cities existed. Even Kansas City exists because the Missouri and the Kansas River converge here. New York exists because of its harbor. Chicago because of Lake Michigan. So you see, proximity to the network was proximity to trade. Proximity to trade was proximity to growth. Railroads are the second era. Railroads didn't replace the water network. It was a layer that was built, a new layer that was built on top. Kansas City became one of the largest rail junctions in America. That's why the stockyards were here. Once the Hannibal Bridge was built to be the first permanent crossing of the Missouri River, Kansas City's economy took off. This is why meatpacking was here. This is why the city's economic identity for a century was built around livestock and grain. It wasn't because Kansas City had better cattle. It was because Kansas City had better connectivity to the markets that wanted cattle. It had better connectivity to the markets that had the cattle. Cattle drives up from Texas, landed in Kansas City at the stockyards, hopped on trains, and went to Chicago, where they were processed and turned into product and shipped to the rest of the country. It's that connectivity network and what was built around that connectivity network that was most important. So then you think of like the third era of connectivity networks, hubs, airports. These hub airports were created around a whole new connectivity geography. The knowledge economy clustered around hubs, these air hubs, because business travel was the connectivity infrastructure of the late 20th century. These great airports were built oftentimes in these big cities that had already been created, but they also created opportunities for other cities. Just thinking again about Kansas City. Kansas City had TWA. And when TWA collapsed, the city lost a connectivity advantage that it had held for decades. And it wasn't a branding problem for Kansas City. It was literally that the infrastructure was lost. That hub, that connectivity network, that the element in that hub that created value was lost. So now we've introduced a new era, a fourth era. The connectivity infrastructure of this generation isn't water, rail, or air. It's compute. Every AI model, every cloud service, every digital product depends on physical processing in physical data centers. The regions that don't design for it are making the equivalent of refusing to connect to the railroad in 1870. Here's the part of this story most of this city hasn't fully registered. This isn't a wave Kansas City is waiting for. We're not inviting, we're trying to attract more of this connectivity infrastructure. It's already landing. Google announced $1 billion data center in the Northland, and it's under construction right now. They confirmed a second campus. There's $10 billion, 500 acres. Meta is already operating here. And the old Kansas City Star printing press, the old Kansas City Star building, not too far from where I sit right now, the building that used to print the news is actually being converted into a 100 megawatt AI facility. The infrastructure isn't coming. The infrastructure is here. So the question is no longer whether Kansas City participates in the compute era. The question is whether it designs for it, or whether it just hosts it. See, every connectivity era that I mentioned, that I just went through, had a common property. The network was everywhere. The network connected all the things. The value concentrated at the nodes. So proximity to the port meant lower shipping costs. Proximity to the rail junction meant faster freight. Data centers work the same way. But let me be precise about how, because I spent 23, 24 years of my life in the network business, and the mechanisms matter. It's the economics of interconnection, direct private connections to cloud providers instead of routing through the public internet. Proximity drives better latency. It's data gravity. Once your data lives somewhere, everything that processes it wants to be nearby. It's the workforce and the vendor ecosystem that builds up around these facilities. It's the fiber density and the grid upgrades that benefit every business in the region. And for one category of technology, autonomous systems, machines operating in the physical world in real time, the physics of distance are going to genuinely matter. So hold that thought, because that's where this argument is headed in the second part of this conversation that'll come out in an episode soon. But remember, the cloud has an address, and the cities closest to that address capture the value. Exactly the way cities closest to the harbor, closest to the river, closest to the rail captured it hundreds of years ago. But here's where the pattern gets a little bit more complicated. Communities are pushing back on data center development, and not somewhere else, but here. It's Independence, it's Smithville, it's Spring Hill. Residents are standing up in public meetings asking about water usage, asking about energy demand, asking about what happens to their utility rates. And they have very legitimate reasons and concerns. A single hyperscale data center can consume as much electricity as a small city. These cooling systems can use millions of gallons of water a year. The facilities occupy hundreds of acres and employ relatively few people compared to the resources that they consume. And the tax packages can be generous while the community benefits stay thin. So I'm going to take this jobs critique, this jobs issue head on in the second part of this, because I think the honest answer changes the entire conversation. But I do want to talk about the absorption problem that is applied to this compute infrastructure. We've talked about the absorption issue before. How do you create the ecosystem around which a startup or which innovation can be absorbed? That's when you provide the value. That's when the investment arrives and the community wasn't designed to absorb it. So capital without design is extraction, even when the intentions are good. And I honestly believe that these communities that are pushing back aren't anti-technology. they're anti-extraction. And they're right to push, not because data centers are bad, but because most of them arrive without the infrastructure designed to make them good. Most regions are asking, how do we attract data center investment? And I believe that that's the wrong question. That's like asking how to attract a railroad spur in 1875. You're positioning yourself as a stop on someone else's network. So the better question is, how do we solve the problems that make data center investment controversial everywhere? And how do we then export those solutions to create value, enterprise value back into the region? We have the means. The problems are known: power, water, cooling, community impact. And power is the binding constraint everywhere, which is exactly why the region that solves it wins. The innovations are already underway right here. The Earth Research Center at KU is building next generation cooling and refrigerant technology. And here's what makes that urgent. The refrigerants in today's cooling systems are being phased out by federal law and global treaties. Every data center operator in the world faces that transition. Every data center operator in the world, especially on the hyperscale side, faces the pushback on cooling technologies and the use of water. The research happening not even 30 miles from this studio right now addresses a compliance problem that every single one of them has. Alternative power, small modular nuclear, advanced geothermal, grid scale storage, water-free cooling. The region that deploys it first solves a community opposition problem for every data center market in the country. And we have more engineers per capita, and I'm told they don't build anything, they're consulting engineers. Well, that's the mind, that's the intellectual capital and the intellectual infrastructure that has actually established Kansas City as the global headquarters, the global capital of stadium design. It should be the thing that establishes Kansas City as the innovation leader for all of these challenges, including the community benefit design. The governance that determines whether an investment creates local value or just occupies local land and is exportable infrastructure. Build the model, become the template. Don't just host the infrastructure, solve the problems that the infrastructure creates. The region that innovates on the friction doesn't just participate in the era, it leads it. So if you're a civic leader, your region is making a generational infrastructure decision right now, whether you know it or not. The regions that designed for water captured centuries, rail a century, air 50 years. The compute era is just beginning. Is your region designing for it or just permitting it? If you're a founder, proximity to the network's node has been proximity to growth for 500 years. The physics haven't changed. And if you're a corporate leader, the communities that solve the friction are where your investments will last. The ones that skip the design work are where your projects get protested, delayed, and resented. The world isn't flat. It never was. It's just built for new mountains. Ports, railroads, airports, data centers. Pattern hasn't changed in 500 years. The only question is whether your region sees it in time to design for it. So now this is just part one of this conversation. In next week's episode, we're going to actually share a recording with someone who spent 20 years making infrastructure bets on this city. And they just watched them pay off in front of the entire world. And then after that, what this infrastructure actually enables for the industries that are already here. Hope to see you there.